was it like on the set of Little House on the Prairie? The actress who played Michael Landon's wife says it wasn't as wholesome as it seemed.
Little House on the Prairie is remembered for its family values, but its finale, The Last Farewell, ended with the entire set being destroyed. This infamous scene, featuring real explosions, was broadcast once and then mysteriously disappeared from reruns for years. This wasn't an accident. It was the result of a bitter feud between star Michael Landon and the network. We're breaking down why this one scene was essentially removed, and the behind-the-scenes drama that made it happen. The myth of the banned episode. Few shows in television history have ever captured the hearts of audiences quite like Little House on the Prairie. For 9 seasons, from 1974 to 1983, the Ingalls family wasn't just a TV show, they were America's family. Michael Landon, Melissa Gilbert, and the entire cast brought Laura Ingalls Wilder's stories of pioneer life into millions of homes, creating a timeless legacy of warmth, hardship, and unshakable community. The show was a beacon of family values in a world that was rapidly changing. But the real end of Little House wasn't a quiet sunset ride into the prairie, it wasn't even the final episode of the main series. No, the true conclusion came a year later, in 1984, in a 2-hour television movie special called Little House: The Last Farewell. And it concluded with one of the most shocking, unbelievable, and downright brutal moments ever broadcast on network television. The entire town of Walnut Grove, the schoolhouse, the church, the Olsons' mercantile, the Ingalls home, was systematically, building by building, blown to smithereens with real high-grade dynamite. For audiences, it was a stunning and emotional gut punch. This wasn't just a set. It was a place they had visited every week for 9 years. They watched in disbelief as the landmarks of their favorite show were reduced to nothing but splintered wood and rubble. And then, after this shocking broadcast, the scene and the movie itself essentially vanished. It was rarely, if ever, seen again in the popular syndication packages that kept the rest of the series on the air for decades. This disappearance gave birth to a powerful legend, that the scene was so violent, so shocking, and so out of line that the network, NBC, pulled it immediately. That it was, for all intents and purposes, a banned episode. But here's the catch. The network didn't order the destruction. The network didn't ban the episode. The truth is infinitely more complicated, and it all centers on one man, the show's star, its creator, and its benevolent father figure, Michael Landon. He was the one who lit the fuse. To understand the explosion, you have to understand the man on screen. He was Charles Pay Ingalls, the moral compass of the frontier. Off-screen, he was the undisputed king of his domain, a creative genius with an iron grip on his empire, and by 1984, he was a man who felt betrayed by the network he'd worked for decades. The destruction of Walnut Grove wasn't just a plot point, it was an act of war. It was a statement. And it was, quite possibly, the single most expensive and dramatic act of revenge in television history. What most people don't realize is that this final violent act was just the tip of the iceberg. The wholesome exterior of Little House on the Prairie concealed a behind-the-scenes world of bitter feuds, dark secrets, toxic relationships, and storylines so disturbing they also got removed from the air. Today, we're digging past the folklore to find the truth, but to understand the explosion, you first have to understand the power of the man who lit the fuse. The King of Big Sky Ranch. Michael Landon was, and this is not an exaggeration, one of the most powerful men in television. His career was a juggernaut. He'd spent 14 years as Little Joe on Bonanza, one of the biggest hits of all time. When that show ended, he didn't just walk into another acting gig, he created an empire. When he pitched Little House on the Prairie to NBC, he did it with a list of non-negotiable demands. He wouldn't just be the star, he would be an executive producer, he would be a primary director, and he would be a head writer. NBC, desperate to keep their golden boy, agreed. And so Landon's version of Little House was born. This is the first major wow factor people miss. The show fans loved wasn't really based on the books. In fact, the show's co-creator, Ed Friendly, had a vision that was much more faithful to the gentle, charming books by Laura Ingalls Wilder. He wanted a simple, sweet family show. Landon wanted drama. He wanted tragedy. He wanted to make people cry. The two men clashed almost immediately. Friendly despised Landon's scripts, feeling they were too dark, too preachy, and veered wildly into soap opera territory. But here's the deal. Landon was the star and the creative engine. His vision was winning the ratings. The feud escalated until Friendly finally sued Landon for breach of contract, and while Friendly kept his executive producer credit, he was effectively pushed out of the creative process entirely. It was the first sign. This was Landon's show, and no one was to get in his way. His control was absolute, and he ruled the set at Big Sky Movie Ranch like a king. And that's putting it lightly. This wasn't some tiny Hollywood backlot. Big Sky Movie Ranch was a massive, sprawling property in Simi Valley, California. It was the legendary home of Gunsmoke Bonanza, and parts of Dallas. Landon's set was the crown jewel, and he was its resident monarch. But life under King Michael was not always the wholesome pioneer dream fans saw on TV. Cast and crew described him as a bundle of contradictions. He was charismatic, funny, and fiercely loyal to those he loved. But he was also a chain-smoking, hard-drinking, notorious perfectionist with a cruel streak. Allison Arngrim, who played Nellie Olson, described the set conditions as brutal. The cast was forced to film in 110-degree Fahrenheit heat while wearing heavy, layered wool and flannel costumes. The women's elaborate wigs were secured with metal pins that would get so hot they would literally burn their scalps. Rattlesnakes were a constant threat, often slithering onto the set. Through it all, Landon was a notorious prankster, but his pranks often bordered on bullying. Yet his worst behavior was reserved for his on-screen wife, Karen Grassel, who played the beloved Caroline Ma Ingalls, dropped a bombshell in her memoir, Bright Lights, Prairie Dust. She revealed that her relationship with Landon was toxic and at times abusive. The crazy part is their biggest feud was over money. When the show became a massive hit, Grassel, a respected theater actress, asked for a raise. Her starting salary was modest, and the show was now a top 10 hit. She argued her pay should reflect that. Landon refused. According to Grassel, Landon argued that she wasn't as popular as he was and that the show's success was all his. He allegedly told her she should just be grateful to be there. When she pushed back, Landon's script suddenly started giving Caroline Ingalls less to do. Her screen time was cut and her character was often sidelined. But it got worse. Grassel alleges that Landon would make crude, humiliating jokes about her body and her feminine parts in front of the entire crew just to put her in her place. It was a power play, plain and simple, a way to break her down for daring to challenge him. And then there was the affair that rocked the set. During the show's run, Landon, a married man, began an affair with a much younger makeup artist and stand-in on the show, Cindy Clarico. She was more than 20 years younger than him. This wasn't just a quiet fling. It was a public drama that split the cast and crew, who were all friends with Landon's wife, Lynn. This act of betrayal didn't just create drama, it blew up the single most important relationship on the set. When Pa broke Laura's heart. The wholesome, loving Ingalls family, it was a complete illusion. The set of Little House was a hotbed of tension, jealousy, and broken relationships, starting with Michael Landon's affair. His betrayal hit one person the hardest, his on-screen daughter, Melissa Gilbert. Gilbert, who played Laura, had always viewed Landon as a true father figure. Her own adoptive father had passed away when she was young, and she grew incredibly close to Landon's actual family. She was best friends with his daughter, Leslie, and was a regular at their house. To Gilbert, Landon was Pa. When he left his wife, Lynn, who was Gilbert's surrogate mother, for the younger makeup artist, Gilbert felt a personal and profound sense of betrayal. She was furious. In her memoir, Prairie Tale, she wrote about how disillusioned she was. The perfect family man she idolized, the man who preached morality on TV every week, was, in her eyes, a hypocrite. This anger and hurt didn't just fade away. It lasted for nearly a decade. For 9 long years after Little House ended, she refused to reconcile with him, cutting off the man she once called her second father. Their relationship was shattered. Time did, eventually, soften the silence. In 1991, in a moment that felt like fate, she made a surprise appearance with Landon on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. In private, they finally made peace. A tearful reunion where years of pain were let go. Tragically, just 1 week later, Michael Landon passed away from an aggressive form of pancreatic cancer. Their reconciliation was painfully brief, but at least it allowed them to close that painful chapter. But Landon's drama wasn't the only feud on the prairie. What most people still don't realize is that the two Ingalls sisters, Laura and Mary, didn't actually get along. At all. On screen, Melissa Gilbert, Laura, and Melissa Sue Anderson, Mary, were the perfect loving pair, but the behind-the-scenes reality was frosty. In her memoir, Gilbert didn't hold back, calling Anderson cold, stuck-up, difficult, and a total snob. Gilbert, who was a boisterous, playful kid, just couldn't connect with the more reserved and serious Anderson. She described Anderson as being aloof and unfriendly to everyone on set except the crew members she deemed important. Allison Arngrim, who brilliantly played the villainous Nellie Olson, confirmed this in her own hilarious memoir. Arngrim remembered Gilbert pulling her aside very early on with a stark warning, "Whatever you do, you watch out for that Melissa Sue Anderson. She's very dangerous, she's evil, and I hate her." Arngrim, who became very close friends with Gilbert, also found Anderson impossible to reach. She described Anderson's demeanor as oddly artificial, like a well-trained beauty pageant contestant who would smile and say hello but had no actual warmth. Gilbert later reflected that Anderson seemed to live entirely within her mother's universe, more controlled, guarded, and focused on her career than on being a kid. The irony is, the two mortal enemies on the show, Laura, Gilbert, and Nellie Arngrim, were real-life best friends who would have sleepovers and play together. Meanwhile, the two loving sisters on screen couldn't stand to be in the same room. This constant simmering tension, this world of fake smiles and hidden resentment was the backdrop for the show. But the fake smiles on set were nothing compared to the dark, twisted, and shocking stories they were actually filming. The most controversial scenes you never saw. So the legend is that the finale was removed for being too shocking. But the wild part is, Michael Landon had been producing removed episodes for years. He loved to push boundaries, and he created several episodes that were so intense, so dark, and so disturbing that they, unlike the finale, were in fact often quietly pulled from syndication, deemed way too inappropriate for family viewing. The most infamous example, hands down, is the two-part storyline Sylvia from Season 7. This was not a typical Little House story. This was a horror movie. In this harrowing arc, a shy teenage girl named Sylvia, played by Olivia Barash, moves to Walnut Grove. She is stalked by a masked man, a local blacksmith, who then brutally assaults her in the woods. The assault leaves her pregnant. For a primetime family drama in 1981, this was unthinkable. Audiences were used to moral lessons, not narratives about intimate violence, trauma, and the shunning of a pregnant teen. The show portrayed Sylvia's trauma with unusual frankness. She struggles with shame, secrecy, and the cruel judgment of the townspeople. But here's the deal. It gets worse. After Albert Ingalls falls in love with her and vows to raise the baby as his own, Sylvia, in a moment of panic, tries to escape her attacker and falls from a high ladder, leading to her passing. It's relentlessly bleak. Letters poured in, parents were horrified, criticizing Landon for subjecting their children to such dark adult themes. To this day, Sylvia is one of the most debated and disturbing episodes in the show's history, and many local stations refuse to air it in reruns. And that wasn't the only one. What about the Season 8 episode The Raccoon? A young Albert Ingalls gets bitten by a pet raccoon. The raccoon, it turns out, is rabid. The episode becomes a dark, agonizing watch as Pa and Ma have to face the very real possibility that Albert will develop rabies, a death sentence in the 1800s. The entire episode is about them waiting for their son to die. It's pure psychological torture. Then there was the episode Bunny from Season 3. Laura's beloved horse, Bunny, is gravely injured in a fall. The horse is in agonizing pain, and Pa Ingalls has to make the choice. In a traumatic scene for any child watching, Pa has to end the horse's life with a firearm just off camera. The rest of the episode is about Laura's crushing grief and her lashing out at her father, blaming him for what he did. And let's not forget the monster of Walnut Grove. In this story, Laura's friend is tragically burned and passes away in a house fire. To cope with the trauma and pain, Laura is given morphine. The episode then features a bizarre, terrifying, and psychedelic dream sequence where Laura, high on the substance, hallucinates her friend's passing. It's a full-on drug trip in the middle of a G-rated show. Finally, there were the romantic storylines that have aged like milk. The most famous is the relationship between Laura Ingalls and Almanzo Wilder. In real life, there was a 10-year age gap, but on screen, the optics were worse. Melissa Gilbert was only 15 years old when she filmed Sweet 16. The episode where the adult Almanzo, played by 23-year-old Dean Butler, suddenly sees her as a woman. Gilbert herself later spoke about how awkward and vulnerable she felt filming romantic scenes, including her first kiss with a grown man. This was The Real Little House on the Prairie, a show that wrapped itself in a quilt of family values while smuggling in storylines about assault, drug use, racism, and trauma. This history of dark, unsyndicatable content is the key. It proves that Landon loved to shock his audience, and that shock factor leads us to the wildest theories about why he really blew up the town. What Landon was really hiding. The official story for the explosion is well known. The show was over. Landon's contract stipulated he had to restore the land at Big Sky Movie Ranch to its original condition, and he didn't want the set reused. So he killed two birds with one stone. He wrote the demolition into the script, letting the production budget pay for it. It's a neat story. Maybe too neat. Over the years, as the legend of the finale has grown, darker and more complex theories have emerged. Theories that paint a picture of a man driven by much more than just frugality and pride. Theory 1. The insurance ploy. This is the most cynical theory, and it's brutally simple. Landon had to pay to tear down the town. That's a huge personal expense, but what if the set was insured for a massive amount? The theory suggests that by blowing it up on camera as part of the story, it was no longer a simple demolition. It was a filming necessity. Some have speculated that this legal distinction could have allowed Landon to not only have the production pay for the explosives and crew, but to also potentially file a massive insurance claim on the destroyed assets. It's a creative way to fulfill a contract, turning a huge liability into a final massive payday. Given his legendary feuds over money with actors like Karen Grassel, it's not a huge leap to see him pulling a fast one on the studio and insurance companies. Theory 2, the symbolic murder of Charles Ingalls. This theory is psychological. Michael Landon was Charles Ingalls. For 9 years, the world saw him as the perfect, moral, infallible father. But Landon himself was the opposite. He was a hard-living, chain-smoking, complex man who was cheating on his wife. Some insiders and critics believe Landon grew to despise the character of Pa. He felt trapped by the wholesome image, a golden cage of his own making. The explosion in this light wasn't about the set. It was a violent, symbolic murder of Charles Ingalls. It was Landon, on national television, destroying the very thing that defined him. A desperate, primal scream for the world to see him as something more than a prairie saint. The only problem? His very next show was Highway to Heaven, where he played an angel. This, the theory argues, proves he couldn't escape, which only makes the explosion a more tragic, failed act of rebellion. Theory 3. The ultimate message to NBC. This is the power play theory. Landon's relationship with NBC was on the rocks. They had moved Little House to a bad time slot. They had canceled it. They had failed to promote the spinoff. Landon was furious. He felt disrespected. The explosion wasn't just about the set, it was a message. It was Landon, on national television, showing the network what he thought of their decision. He was burning the ships, proving that he was the one with the real power. He was telling NBC and every other network in Hollywood, I am in control. I will destroy my own multi-million-dollar creation before I let you take it from me or disrespect it. It was the ultimate alpha move, a scorched earth tactic to negotiate his next big deal from a position of terrifying strength. Theory 4. The cleansing of Big Sky Ranch. This is the most out there theory. Remember, Big Sky Ranch wasn't just his set. It was the home of Gunsmoke, Bonanza, and countless other westerns. It was a piece of land that held decades of Hollywood history. The theory suggests Landon, in his own grandiose way, saw the explosion as a purification, a way to wipe the slate clean, ending not just Little House, but the entire era of television that the ranch represented. It was a final, fiery curtain call on the Old West, ensuring that his show would be the last thing that land ever saw. Were any of these theories true? Was it just business? Or was it a complex act of a wounded ego? But what is the real, final truth of the matter? The man who burned it all down. The most popular theory, the one that still echoes in Hollywood backrooms, is simple: revenge. By 1984, Michael Landon was television. He had been a star for 25 years, from Bonanza to Little House. But the network, NBC, had betrayed him. The cancellation of Little House wasn't a gentle, mutual parting of ways. The ratings were down, the kids were grown, and NBC was pivoting. They wanted car chases, explosions, and synthesizers. They wanted the A-Team and Knight Rider. Michael Landon's frontier morality was suddenly old-fashioned. Landon was notoriously proud and had a massive ego. He was Charles "Pa" Ingalls. The network executives didn't just cancel his show, they insulted him. According to this theory, the finale was a spectacular multi-million-dollar middle finger to the suits in New York. They wanted explosions? He'd give them explosions. He'd give them the biggest, most expensive, most meaningful explosion in TV history. He would destroy the set so completely that NBC could never use it again. They couldn't rent it out, they couldn't film a new, cheaper show on his land, and they couldn't profit one more cent from the world he had built. It was a scorched earth policy, both literally and figuratively. If he couldn't have Walnut Grove, no one could. The cursed land of Simi Valley. But what if the reason was darker? What if the betrayal wasn't just by network executives, but by the land itself? This is the theory you won't hear in official interviews. Little House was filmed on Big Sky Movie Ranch in Simi Valley. It was a beautiful, idyllic location, but 9 years is a long time, and according to set whispers, things had soured. Landon was known to be a deeply spiritual, almost superstitious man, and the set, once a place of joy, had seen its share of darkness. There were the bitter backstage feuds, the strained relationships, and the immense pressure of maintaining the wholesome facade. Then there were the accidents. Strange, sudden windstorms that would rip through the set. Unexplained equipment failures. A sense of unease that had reportedly settled over the cast and crew in the final years. The land, some believed, was tired. It had absorbed too much of the cast's real-life drama. According to this wild theory, Landon didn't just want to demolish the set, he wanted to cleanse it. He needed to purify the land with fire. The explosives weren't just for practical effect, they were a form of ritual. It was the only way to release the negative energy that had built up and truly set the spirits of the show and himself free. It was a final, violent exorcism of the place that had been both his greatest triumph and his golden cage. The lost episode and the moral panic. For a whole generation of fans, the finale simply vanished. This created the most pervasive myth of all, that the episode was banned. This theory claims the finale did air that one night in 1984, but the backlash was so immediate and so severe that NBC buried it in a vault. Parents, who had trusted the show for nearly a decade, were horrified. Their children were traumatized watching Laura Ingalls cry as her entire life was blown to bits. The rumor was that the network was flooded with thousands of angry letters. "How dare you," they wrote, "you destroyed our children's favorite town." The downer ending was seen as a betrayal of the American family itself. It was too dark, too violent, too real. This theory held that The Last Farewell became a lost episode, a piece of forbidden media. Fans would hear about it, a shocking rumor that the town was destroyed, but they could never see it. It wasn't included in the rerun packages. This made the episode legendary, a holy grail for TV fans, a lost scene that was deemed too intense and too cynical for the public. It was the day Pa Ingalls taught America's children a final lesson. Nothing is sacred, and everything you love will eventually be destroyed. The real story. So let's get down to earth. After all the smoke clears, what's the real story? Why was this one scene removed? The truth, as we've seen, is that it wasn't immediately removed. The finale, The Last Farewell, aired on February 6, 1984, and it shocked a lot of people. But it wasn't banned by NBC. The legend became the truth because the reality of television is all about business. Here's the deal. The main Little House series was over. Its ratings had been sliding for years. The kids were grown up and the audience was moving on to flashier shows like The A-Team and Knight Rider the spin-off. Little House, A New Beginning, had already aired and failed. The show was done. Michael Landon's contract did require him to restore the land to its original pre-Prairie condition. This is a standard clause, and yes, that would have cost him a fortune out of his own pocket. And he absolutely hated the idea of his iconic set, the one used for his show, being recycled for a cheap commercial, a different TV show, or a B-movie. So, the official story holds up. He was a practical man. He solved all his problems in one brilliant, fiery move. He wrote the demolition into the script. The show's production budget paid for the explosives and the labor. He got to restore the land for free. He got a spectacular, dramatic ending for his show, and he ensured no one would ever use his set again. It was a masterstroke. Why did the removed myth start? Because of syndication. Reruns. When local TV stations bought the Little House package to air in the afternoons, they wanted the classics. They wanted the heartwarming, repeatable standalone episodes. The Last Farewell is a massive downer. It's a definitive, heartbreaking end. It doesn't make you want to tune in tomorrow for another fun adventure. It's just bleak. The syndicators and local stations often just left it out. They didn't air it. A whole generation of fans grew up watching reruns and never saw the explosive finale. They just heard about it, a shocking rumor that the town was destroyed. This made the episode legendary, a lost scene that was too intense for TV. In reality, it wasn't too intense. It was just bad for business. But are we missing a key detail? The thing is, all of it can be true. The business-savvy decision to save money can also be a deeply personal act of revenge against a network. The practical need to clear the land can also be a symbolic cleansing of a character he was tired of. Landon was a complex man, he was frugal, and he had a massive ego. He was a sentimental family man, and he was a ruthless businessman. The legacy of Little House on the Prairie is, therefore, twofold. There's the show the world remembers, the gentle, heartwarming lessons of Pa, Ma, and the girls, wrapped in a sunny, nostalgic haze. And then there's the show that actually existed, a complex, dark, and daring drama full of controversial topics and bitter backstage feuds, all ruled by one brilliant, troubled, and controlling man. The explosion wasn't a betrayal of the show, it was the most honest moment in its entire 9-year run. It was the day the wholesome, family-friendly mask finally came off, revealing the fire, passion, and creative rage that had been burning underneath it all along. It was the only way it could end, not with a whimper, but with a bang. Was blowing up the town a brilliant move by a creative genius or the petty act of a vengeful star? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe.